Dr. Heather Morrison, Associate Professor, School of Information Studies, University of Ottawa, Canada, and all dear participants, a very good evening to you all. I, Professor Preeti Mahajan, on behalf of the Department of Library Information Science, Punjab University, Chandigarh, and on my own behalf, welcome you all in the 19th webinar, which is a part of the webinar series being hosted by the department on the theme Information Generation, Dissemination and Use During COVID-19 Lockdown. The webinar series are being organized at the time of an extraordinary situation emerging out of the global pandemic and the consequent lockdown, where almost everything has come to an abrupt halt throughout the world, and the academic world is not an exception. In such a situation, online learning and online meeting have become a new normal for all of us to complete the syllabi as well as also as a platform for continuous professional development. The theme of the webinar series thus was selected in order to update the professional knowledge through dissemination of information on cutting edge technology and utilize the period of lockdown in productive academic activity. Now, I take this opportunity to introduce the speaker of the international webinar today. We have amongst us Dr. Heather Morrison, who is currently working as Associate Professor, School of Information Studies, University of Ottawa, Canada. Prior to this, she has also worked at Salmon University and University of British Columbia in different capacities. She had also been the coordinator of British Columbia Electronic Library Network, Knowledge Network, coordinator at the Alberta Library, and Access Services coordinator at Concordia University College of Alberta, Canada. She has also been actively involved in various scholarly and professional activities. She has organized various events, including open access workshops, roundtable discussions, media democracy days, etc. She has been the founding editor, Additive Theory Research Partnership, the Canadian Journal of Library and Information Practice and Research, and has participated in the development of new open access journal as member of the founding editorial board. She has been associated with various journals as a peer reviewer, as well as other journals, which include Journal of E-Democracy and Governance, Journal of Information Science, Information Research, Journal of Medical Internet Research, Canadian Journal of Library and Information Practice and Research, Journal of Librarianship and Scholarly Communication, MDPI Publications, and PLOS One. She has also been associated with various research funding application assessment activities, including external reviewer communications, media studies, gender studies, information studies, and related fields of social sciences and humanities, Research Council of Canada, Ontario. She has been the roundtable member of Peter Wall Center, University of British Columbia, Vancouver, which aims at gathering leading scholars working in different disciplinary fields, journalists, rankers, and university leaders from different parts of the world to critically and analytically address the interconnections between the political economy of ranking and the challenges facing higher education. She is a member of various committees at the University of Ottawa as well as British Columbia Library Associations. She has supervised doctoral as well as master's thesis. She has authored one book, 14 refereed journal articles, 13 conference publications, two refereed chapter in books, two non-refereed journal articles, 11 reports, besides 46 other contributions. Today, Dr. Morrison would be speaking on sustaining the knowledge common, wherein she will provide an overview of her project and a sample of highlights of the sub-projects, and also will discuss the open research approach, prioritizing new approaches and formats over traditional publications. Before I hand over the proceedings to Dr. Morrison, may I request all the participants to please mute their audio and do not turn on the video for better connectivity. We would also appreciate if you pay attention to the speaker rather than asking for PPTs time and again in the chat box. Please do not drop your email messages, etc. in the chat box during the webinar, we would be sharing a link with you wherein you are supposed to fill up your name, affiliation, email address, etc. for the certificates. And please do not panic if it takes a little longer for you to receive the e-certificates. Now, may I now request Dr. Morrison to enlighten us with the project and findings so that it is beneficial to all of us. Dr. Morrison, please.
Hey, thank you very much. And I'm going to now start start by saying hello to everybody. And now I'm going to start sharing my screen so that you can see my PowerPoint. Okay, so sustaining the knowledge commons, and I'm going to bring in those aspects of my research project that are related to COVID, although I'm not doing research specifically on COVID, although one of my research assistants who can't be with us here today was doing a bit of that. First, I want to talk a little bit about our school. I'm not really familiar with how things work in other countries, but we're here in Ottawa in the National Capital Region. We're one of the newest library schools. We're called an information school. It used to be what was called Library and Information Studies, but because we're new, we just didn't start with the L, but we are accredited by the American Library Association. So if anyone is interested, this is how the accreditation tends to work. It's regional in nature. So to work in North America for the jobs that require accreditation, such as librarians, professional librarians, you have to have gone to an ALA accredited school. And because
before you continue, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could you do a slide share so that we can see the whole screen? Right now, the screen is visible a little smaller. So that way we'll have a better font view.
Okay. I'm sorry. Let me see what I...
At the bottom, there is a slide share option, or you can do function 5. Right now, your slide, yes, this way.
Is that better?
No.
Is that better?
No, it's not better this way. We need a slideshow instead of this way. Could you go back to your presentation? I'll tell you where it's located.
Okay.
When you go to the bottom, where you can see the zoom in button, 107% is coming up. Just right next to it, there is a slideshow option. There is use slideshow option also coming up over there.
Okay, I'm trying to find this in my...
Go towards the bottom of your screen. You will see 107% zoom in factor is there. Right next to it, left side of it, there is an icon.
A full screen there.
Left of it, madam, in the left
side of this 107.
Left side of the slider. Yes.
Just
a bit right, ma'am.
Yes, this one.
Yes, this one.
Is that working?
It's not going in full screen mode from your end. I think you have done some changes in it. So you can see all the slides. That what happens is that your main slide is still not taking the whole. Yes.
No, it's okay.
Yes, it's okay. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. It's fine.
Okay, great.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I wanted that we should stop in the beginning itself so that there is no issues afterwards. Thank you so much, ma'am. Please continue.
That's a good idea. My apologies. I'm not that familiar with WebEx. We've been using other kinds of things. Okay, so this is how the accreditation works. So also if I'm have my ALA accredited master's degree, which I do, I wouldn't be able to go work in other countries as well. We're different from the other programs. We're the only bilingual program in North America in English and French. We have, so our students are required to have some familiarity in both languages on entry. And the reason for this is because Canada is an officially bilingual country. The main employer in our region is the federal government, and they have a tremendous need for our graduates who are bilingual. That's actually the reason why our program was started. We're pretty small, and that's partly because of the bilingual entrance requirement. It's not that easy to find people who have the credentials to come in. So we have about 50 students right now. Some are full-time and some are part-time. The degrees that we offer are the Master of Information Studies, and we have a new graduate diploma in Information Management. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID, just how things are going here, where I think we're in a different stage. I gather that things are a bit more serious, more in the first wave right now in India. For us, this came in mid-March. We went from, in very short order of time, from thinking, well, there's very low risk, there's no cases in Ottawa, to putting a committee together to the whole campus was shut down and all classes were moved online with 2 days notice. Now, fortunately for me, I was on sabbatical, so I wasn't part of that whole process, but just reading the emails and realizing what people were going through, that was a lot to go through in a short period of time. The university and public libraries were closed. For the most part, they still are. Library staff are working from home. For us, many of the resources already were online in the first place, so that's not as bad as it would have been if everything was all physical. We do have an urban-rural digital divide, so it's good to see that your university is doing well in the virtual environment. Here we do have still students who are in the more rural areas who don't have good internet service, so that's one of our challenges in terms of teaching and providing services. Talking with other faculty, there is a concern about lack of access to physical books and other items that are in the library, and it does affect me a little bit, but being in open access, it doesn't affect me as much as other people. So what's it doing to our research? Unless you're working on COVID, our science labs were closed when the university was closed, so most of the research is actually slowed right down. People gathered the personal protective materials and donated it to the hospital because we had terrible shortages here, and we're just now beginning to catch up. So this past weekend, from mid-March, this past weekend was the first time I was able to find a box of disposable masks that I could actually buy. That's how far behind we are in these things. We're starting to catch up now. Huge research interruptions. People are doing field work, had to stop. Anyone doing in-person interviews. There's all kinds of travel restrictions, school closures, kids at home. I have a student who's here from India and wants to go home for the summer, but it's really hard to go home. And then if she does, it's going to be hard to get back. So she's away from her family. And that's really very hard for our students, but we're all trying to cope the best we can. For our funding agencies that provide funding for research, they're very supportive. They've been giving people extensions. My funder has said, if you need an extra year for your research, just take it, no problem. The science research funders is actually giving people more funding because you have to keep your labs going, get them restarted, get new PPE because you gave it all to the hospital and that sort of stuff. Okay.
अब बता इसलिए मैंने डिस्टर्ब नहीं किया पापा ने बोला मैंने फोन किया तो चितनु बोली दीदी थक गई है सो गई है May I request the participant to please mute yourself?
Okay. Yeah. So now we
sorry Dr. Morrison, I'm really sorry for the interruption. Actually the version which we are using today is for the meeting one, so I can't unmute, I can't mute all of them from my side. They can unmute also, so that is creating some issue. I'm really sorry for it. But I request all the participants to please stay muted. This is my humble request. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Morrison.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we're dealing with this. I'm teaching a spring course, so I just started yesterday. I'm using Zoom and I'm trying to figure things out and help my students figure things out and teach at the same time. So we're going through those things too. Now, in terms of pandemic, where our country and our province is that we feel that we're kind of past the first wave, but still weary about the second wave. So we're starting to reopen a little bit within the scope of public health requirements. But this is the science research lab's priority. So things where you can't do the teaching and you can't do the work unless you're there. The university library, they're working towards digital scanning for researchers. So if you can't physically go in to get the book, they'll scan it for you. Still working on this. The public libraries have curbside pickup now, but there's still distance teaching and offices are closed. So I'd love to be able to use my own office for my teaching over the summer, but my office is in a high-rise building, and so we're probably going to have to wait a bit longer to be able to do this. So I have to work from home. Okay, so on to my research project, and just wanted to start with the vision. What am I talking about? So what is this knowledge commons that we're trying to sustain here? The idea is a global sharing of the knowledge of humankind, free of charge to the readers, and as open access as possible, but I recognize other rights such as privacy. So this is a bit of a difference from my approach to open access from some of the other people working in this area, and free for everybody who is qualified to contribute. So this is recognizing academic qualifications, whether it's the appropriate qualifications from my university or from your university, but I also recognize things like traditional knowledge. So here in Canada, we're going through a process of truth and reconciliation with our Indigenous peoples, and we're wanting to respect their traditional knowledge. And also when we're doing research and people are talking about their experiences, when it comes to their experience, they're the expert. So 2 reasons for doing this. One is to respect different traditions, but also to address blind spots in Western knowledge. So as we're trying to deal with things like climate change, this is one of the things I would say is a real blind spot, that we do not understand how to have a relationship with nature that is sustainable in the long term. So the Sustaining the Knowledge Commons project is to figure out how are we going to transition our scholarly communications from the demand side, so the funding from subscriptions purchase, to the supply side, so funding for production to enable open access. And within this broad scope, there are a few different lines of research. One is the analysis of models. I'm going to talk a bit about this. So what should we do? Institutional repositories, library publishing, which is very popular here in North America, both of those. Transitioning traditional publishers, which is a bigger thing in the EU, not quite as much here. We look at both empirically what's happening and some of the theoretical models. Policy analysis, so funding agencies are in the process, and universities, in the process of developing and refining their policies for open access. So what are the policies? What kind of policies that we need in order to accomplish this vision of open access that I have? And one specific thing that I look at is the open access article processing charges. We're doing a longitudinal survey because this is one of the models. And initially, a lot of people were hoping, I was hoping, that this would bring some competition into the system and lower the prices. But is that really what's going to happen? And we've been doing this for a while now. And the longer I do this, the less of that being a possibility is happening. We'll get back to that later on. So the funding is from Canada's Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, which pays for the research assistance here. So I've had 2 grants so far, and I'm nearing the end of the second grant, although I do have an extension because COVID has impacted everybody's research. I have an open research approach. So as you've heard, I've done a lot of publishing of articles and things, but that's part of my thing is that we need to move away from these traditional formats of publications to new ones. And because this is my area, I have more of the luxury of being able to do this than other scholars might not have. So for example, when I applied for tenure not too long ago, to be able to evaluate my tenure doc file in this area, you have to know stuff about open access. So when I say my research blog is the most important thing that I do, the people who evaluate my file get that. When I have a colleague who does the same thing, they might not have evaluators who have that particular understanding. Focus is on open peer review. There's many different approaches. So I have a particular approach. I'm not saying it's the right approach, but it's one. I like to experiment with things. And data versus. So the OA APC, lots and lots of data, and the dramatic growth of open access. So I'm more than one dataverse where I put data to share with everybody for open access. So here's one example of the kinds of things that we do. So I'm not talking about a research project. I'm kind of doing an overview of a number of different things that we're doing here. So back in 2016, was published in 2017, I did an analysis of the prospects of transitioning Elsevier as the biggest scholarly publisher towards open access. So what inspired this is Elsevier used to have virtually no open access journals. As of that time, they had 511 fully open access journals and over 2,000 hybrid journals. At that time, most didn't charge APCs. That's changed, as we see from our APC project that we're still working on. But some things are suggesting to me that I'm not optimistic about the chances of transitioning this publisher. One thing is what I would call a kind of somewhat deceptive approach to copyright. So for the open access articles, the copyright is the name of the author, but if you look at the details, and they're pretty transparent, they're up on their website, it's really a copyright transfer, but it's in the name of the author. But it's very clear on their website that the author becomes a third party with respect to their own work with respect to copyright. So, okay, someone wants to annotate the shared content. I think I'm going to decline that. I think that is okay. Okay, and so that's one of the things that makes me wonder whether they're preparing to, if you force us to move to open access, we could then flip back. And I think it's important to understand that the funding for the articles that are being published today is only a small part of their revenue stream, that they have all these back issues where they're made. This is a big company, and their main asset is copyright ownership of a whole lot of stuff. And they also provide services such as search services that are integrated, ScienceDirect, Scopus. So the funding for the articles would not replace that revenue. So this is my thing. I'm very cautious about the idea of it, trying to move over to some of the big traditional scholarly publishers, which is another example of the analysis of models. This is coming from my thesis. So my thesis was, my doctorate was relatively recent. I graduated in 2012. And the STM figures is from Johnson, Watkinson, and May. So that is the STM report. So that's the major industry report. So from the perspective of the researchers and the reviewers, the journal articles are a gift economy. So in order to be recognized and to get a job as a professor, I have to give away my articles, and I'm giving away my work as a peer reviewer. And yet at the same time, it's a 25 billion a year industry. So that's a lot of money. Okay, so theoretical analysis. So actually, we've published the IAMCR version. It's in the institutional repository, although I made some problem issues or errors with the formatting, which my colleague Dr. Rahman has corrected. So I need to put the correct version in there, and then I'll be ready to share that via my blog and with your group as well if you're interested. Okay, so we're looking at 3 different approaches to this transition from subscriptions purchase to open access. So many people trying to do the same thing, trying to make open access, free access to all of our knowledge available to everybody. One is the Plan S, also called the Coalition S. So the Coalition S are the members, and the plan is the Plan S. So this is started in Europe. It's fairly new, and it has a very ambitious timeline. I think they've extended to 2021 to say that anything that's funded by any of their research funders, and these are big, mostly European. These are huge, mostly European, countrywide research funders will need to make their work open access. But this also affects people in the developing world because the big funders for researchers, international funders for researchers in the developing world also are members of Plan S. So that includes the Wellcome Trust, so that's the world's second largest medical research funder. And they work primarily in the developing world. The Gates Foundation and Canada's, they're not a member. Okay, so that's where they're coming from, and their approach is to try to transition, not changing the system, just making it open access. So they're trying to do the transition Elsevier to open access. That I've just said, I looked at this a couple of years ago, and I'm very skeptical that would ever happen and stick, but that's what they're trying to do. Things are moving so fast here. It was just a few years ago that the OA 2020 group, which was started in Germany, came up with a very similar approach, and they both still exist. So a lot is going on in this area. It's a real challenge to keep up with things. So we're not trying to cover all the approaches. We're just taking a few. Another is the Global Sustainability Coalition for Open Science Services, which the acronym is SCOSS. And that is quite different because they're focused on the infrastructure. So they fund things like the Directory of Open Access Journals, the Public Knowledge Project, which does the open journals system so that people can use this and to do their own journals. So this is the membership. So Plan S, Coalition S is Europe Plus. Global Sustainability Coalition is more global in scope. So I was pleased to see, for example, that there's a couple of African universities in Coalition S, but the Association of African Universities has joined SCOSS. One thing to know about SCOSS is that they're quite new, and in terms of the funding, it's quite small, and they're really trying to provide temporary bridge funding for some of these services that people have started up that don't have an ongoing funding stream. So there's a limit to what can go there. And also another area where a lot is going on, because this was started just a couple of years ago, and already there's another group called Invest in Open Infrastructure. And so SCOSS is a member of this other group. The one that started that's a bit more stable is the PubMed Central, the international group. So I'm not sure if everyone knows all about PubMed and PubMed Central. Just a bit of history there. Back in the 1960s, U.S. National Institutes of Health took on a project to index the world's medical literature, and they were also preserving this in their libraries. So primarily English in nature, but they do index things in many languages, although of course they're American and their selection criteria does have that lens of American. And that used to be available. You used to be able to buy the print indexes, then they moved to CDs, and they moved to online, and that was quite expensive. So even in Canada, I was working in Western Canada in the 1990s, and they had this service called Redline, and we couldn't afford to get this for all of our students there. We did have a biology program, so we had a limited license that just the biology students could use this. But around the time they made this index openly available to anyone in the world, which is a wonderful, wonderful gift to the world. And then they've been building on this with other services. They have all kinds of data services that are integrated with PubMed. And one is PubMed Central. So this is, the idea is to archive the full text of the actual articles, not just the indexing. So they've got a lot of the stuff now. I think a recent search for cancer, just the whole thing, I think we're about close to half of the indexed articles, there's free full text available. Okay, so that's PubMed Central and freely available to anybody in the world, which is nice. The idea of PubMed Central International is that other regions can participate in this and have mirror sites and contribute their own works to their local site rather than to the US. And to date, they've had 2 others. There was a PMC Canada that was rather short-lived. I don't know why. I suspect it's funding. And the other is PMC EU. So if you look at their criteria for participating, yes, it's nice that they're inviting everybody internationally, but you have to play by their rules, and you have to be pretty rich to be part of PMC International. So EU level to be part of that. It's a really good model in terms of access. It's making things accessible to everybody, and also archiving, which many of the other repositories and things haven't done this. So this sometimes confuses people because they want everything in XML format, because they're looking at not just making things accessible, but preserving for the long term. My concern for this, the world relying on the US for access, is if you look at what they say it's for, it's the mission, it's for Americans. So the rest of the world is relying for free access service, which is generously provided by the US government. But this is a government that recently pulled out of the World Health Organization. So I'm not sure that this is wise in that particular sense. Some of the theories that we're working, and models that we're working with, looking at this lens with, one is the idea of trying to figure out the exact terminology is really challenging here. You could say knowledge justice. Some people talk about epistemic justice, injustice, or oppression. So Andrews and Okpanachi were doing some research in Africa, and they talked about the concept of epistemic oppression. So this is kind of a neo-colonial phenomenon, so that African universities, as we make our work, PubMed Central, Plan S, available to people in Africa, we're sharing our knowledge. When African scholars come to North America or Europe to study, they're learning our knowledge. But this is not giving them space to think for themselves. So this is a concept we want to bring in. Leslie Chan and colleagues, and one of his colleagues who's done some of this work is via Aruna Chalam. So he's a very famous open access advocate who's from India. So I've been corresponding with him recently. I'll send him a copy of this PowerPoint after this. They talk about the concept of north to south versus south to north and south to south. Okay, so the idea of north to south, Plan S, Coalition S, this is thinking that we here in Europe, in North America, we know everything, and so we'll share our things with you, with maybe a little bit of opportunity for you to participate. The problems that with this is that it doesn't give people in the space in the South to focus on problems in their areas. So one example that Leslie Jan talks about is there are countries where river blindness is a huge issue, but that's not what researchers are focusing on, because that's not what gets you published in the big international journals. Okay, so to have more scope to focus on the local, which is, it's not just north to south and south to south, but the idea of international journals and not being able to focus on local issues, that's important for us as well. So here in Canada, my funder also has a program called the Aid to Scholarly Journals, because if we're doing research about things in Canada, we're a small country, and so the international journals are not necessarily interested in things like Canadian law, politics, society, that sort of thing. So the local matters everywhere, and there are ideas that people have about universality of knowledge that don't necessarily help us to solve local problems. Okay. We're also using Ostrom's famous work on governing the commons. So she looked at the traditional commonly shared resources that people have around the world as an alternative to Western notions of you either have to privatize things or have things run by the government. And so she did an empirical study of many of the commons that are existed and derived some design principles for how to make this work. So we're taking this work and we're looking at these three approaches from that lens. So the SCOS, the middle one, they actually use this theory in developing this particular model. So we're finding it is a bit tricky because her work was on the physical resources, so sharing a watershed, sharing fisheries, that sort of thing. Does it work in the electronic environment, and how? But we've done this work and we're finding that, yeah, it is kind of useful for example, to think about, do the models work? So for example, are the people who are affected by the rules, do they have a chance to participate in making the rules and shaping the rules and that sort of thing? So in the case of SCOS, it's yes. In the case of Plan S, yeah, sort of. There is some opportunity. For PubMed Central, it's the U.S. National Institutes of Health. Our rules, or there's no other way. So in terms of participation, the SCOS, even though it's small, but in terms of participation and potential for the global knowledge commons, the SCOS model has advantages. Another way of looking at the same thing is what I call equity versus charity. So if you're trying to transition the existing publishers of Plan S, I call that a charity model. We're sharing our stuff, which is way better than not sharing our stuff. So that's some advantages. The SCOS, they support tools that are mostly open source tools so that anybody can use them. So this, to me, has more of a potential to lead to equity. So in India, you can produce your own journals and become not more, actually India is very much a knowledge producer, but to strengthen that role, to have the good jobs as academic editors and leaders in publishing, why not have them in India rather than trying to fund them for in the UK, that kind of thing. And PMC International is very much a charity model. You can share our work and you can participate, but exclusively under our terms. And another theory, I'm not sure if people are aware of or not, that's called development of underdevelopment. I'm looking at the article here by Anders Frank. So this is kind of the article that everybody refers to, although unfortunately, I think people refer to this because it's the first article published in English, and Latin American scholars have been writing about this for some time. And the idea is challenging the idea that everybody started off being undeveloped, and Western civilization came in and started developing us. And so some of us are further behind, and we just need to develop. And their point is that some of the things that people are doing are actually creating underdevelopment. It's not that you're behind, it's that we're pushing you down, kind of. So, looking at some of the models, so Plan S, Coalition S, the part of that model is to require that the researchers who are funded, so by Wellcome Trust, by the Gates Foundation, need to use some of the most open Creative Commons licenses that allow blanket downstream commercial use by anyone without having to ask for permission. Okay, so once you do that, downstream users can create commercial products. And these commercial products, because there's no reciprocity built in, they may not be affordable in the developing world. So one example, I mean, this is already happening, is Elsevier takes, if you give stuff away for free that you do your research in India and you have to use this license, it goes into Scopus, but that doesn't give you free access to Scopus. So it actually gives the developing countries and researchers a bit of one step forward in the benefits of open access. More people can access their work, more impact, but 2 steps behind, because the next generation of tools that people are working on, AI, using AI and that sort of thing, you get left out. So is this going to work? Okay, so I'm moving on to something different here, and this is going back into COVID. So I tend to flip around as an overview of things, but there's a reason for it. So policy analysis. So why does the Global Knowledge Commons, why is it important for all of us? And one of this, and one example, and this is something that I and others were writing about some time ago, is a pandemic. So if we have a pandemic, whether people in another country are able to deal with it is going to impact us. So in that sense, it's kind of we're shooting ourselves in the foot if we hoard our knowledge, keep it to ourselves. And we're seeing this with the current pandemic. Way back in 2007, most of the scholarly publishers, and I didn't gather the historical empirical evidence, just knowing at the time, we're still very much into we own the copyright, and so if you can't afford the articles or you don't have access to those. But they've learned, because they understand this theoretical argument, that if they hoard knowledge at a time of pandemic, they are going to be critiqued. So Elsevier was just totally on top of this, and other publishers have been as well, and coming up with temporary free access that is very specific to COVID. So temporary, I've heard that Elsevier is already planning to take down the free access. So that's a concern, that planning this in the fall, and we're kind of expecting the fall being a high probability of a second wave here in Canada. But yeah, so that push has helped to push the publishers, but it's limited, specific to COVID, and it's very limited in time. So this is the traditional Western-based publishers are doing this, but thanks to Angie Shi, one of my research assistants, who unfortunately can't be with us today because she had to defend her thesis yesterday as she's getting her master's degree from the Telfer School of Management here. So she had to stop working on this. But she was able to read some of the stuff on the Chinese websites and do some research there. And we're finding out basically that things are very similar in China, that they have this Chinese open access aggregator and they have more than 10,000 open access journals. They're in Chinese, so I can't read them. There's someone who, can everybody please check to make sure you're muted, because we're getting the sounds of someone? Okay.
I request Pradeep Kumar, please mute yourself. Pradeep Kumar.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the Chinese National Knowledge Infrastructure. So it's a very similar kind of thing to what we have here in Canada. We have the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, which includes support for open access, and it also includes some of the academics. They have some of the problems with the they're near monopoly, and they charge outrageous prices, just like Elsevier charges outrageous prices. And it's been very interesting for me to learn about this, and looking at the libraries that Angie was doing. They were, it's very similar here. Of course, they had a very strict lockdown early on. So the libraries were trying to provide free access on a temporary basis for the most part. And she was looking at the library website. Some of the issues and things that they were dealing with which were things like the authentication of users so that they could access the electronic resources from home. So my main takeaway from this is that people in China are facing very similar situation to what we are here in Canada. The people on the ground, what the government is doing is a different thing, and I suspect that that is common, more common than not, pretty much everywhere globally. Because I work in the area of policy, my most important recommendations, the number one is that we've now understood that hoarding knowledge in a time of pandemic is stupid and counterproductive. What we need to get our minds around next is that we should not patent vaccines, drugs, or treatments, or if people do get patents, there should be compulsory licensing. Because if someone develops a vaccine in one country and they patented it to get the most possible profit for themselves, and they don't share with other countries, then that will result in a lot more people dying. That needs to be the case, and it will also allow this disease to continue for longer. That needs to be the case. So what goes around comes around. And the world has the global success of eliminating smallpox is still fairly recent. There's many other illnesses that we got close, but not quite. So we didn't quite get there with polio, and now we're seeing there's still polio in the world, and we're seeing that there's drug-resistant polio coming up. So there's reasons to for all of us to be working on this together and sharing our knowledge, and including stuff that we might normally have. That's my perspective. What is going to happen will be interesting to watch. My recommendations as well for many librarians who are working in this area, the immediate focus is let's open on the resources most directly related to specifically on COVID, but anything on the other coronaviruses, things on virology in general. So, the Elsevier is making COVID-specific things available, but that's not how researchers work. In order to do your work, you need to have the basic science as well, which is pretty much slowed down because of the pandemic and everything moving over to COVID. For the people who work with the institutional repositories, it's what I call a teachable moment, that the researchers who are usually very busy, too busy to put their stuff in the IR, you can now explain to them that if you do this, it could help with the COVID. So that's my suggestion. I have no idea if anyone's doing this. I think everybody is too distracted by the pandemic to focus on anything else. So every researcher and scholar that I know of is trying to deal with things. If you're a scientist, your labs shut down. Where are you going to get the new PPE? Where are you going to get the resources to manage with social distancing in the lab for everybody who's teaching? Because we're still going to be doing online courses for some time. We're still trying to figure out the fall and how people are going to do very much else. In the medium term, okay, we're getting a lot of the resources that are out there are now open access, but we need to get closer to 100% so that more people can participate in this. So when the resources are too expensive and people can't afford them, and this includes the places in the developing world, it also includes some of the smaller places, smaller institutions in places like Canada too. We can't necessarily afford all this stuff either. Okay. Moving on, different project here, just to give you a flavor of the kinds of things I do. The article processing charges project is an example of open research. And just a caveat here, I study APCs. I don't pay them, and I don't particularly like the model. It's what people are using. It's kind of what Plan S is pushing, and other policymakers are pushing. So we need to look at what's going on here. So this is a picture of one of the data verses. So rather than just sharing our articles and results of studies, we're wanting to move towards open sharing of data. One of the real challenges here is how do researchers get proper credit for doing that? So when I released a data set a few years ago, I published the documentation in a new kind of journal called Data that came out by MDPI. So the idea was you could have the documentation peer reviewed. So I mean, that's useful, but I can publish the data set itself in our local institutional Dataverse, and then I can put the documentation up on my blog, and then it is available for open peer review. So I didn't get a lot of comments, and some of the most interesting comments were about the open peer review process rather than the data set. But for when I posted to MDPI data, yeah, it was peer reviewed, but I didn't get really a lot of in-depth feedback there either, because people don't know how to peer review a data set and its documentation. Maybe if it's exactly in the area that you're working in, but there's only a couple of us in the world working in this area. And Walt Crawford also does similar research, but he's not paid to do this kind of thing, and so he doesn't do peer review. This is an example of a research blog post. So when we do our research, sometimes I still publish in journals and do the traditional book chapters and things like that. But for the most part, my research is out there in my blog. So working with Angie Shi here, and we did an comparison of SpringerOpen from 2019 to 2020. So we published the abstract on the blog. It's the same as a published paper. We tweet the blog post, we added to the Open Access Tracking Project, and I'll send it to relevant listservs, such as the ScholComm listserv, which is librarians mostly in North America. I think it's an open list if you want to join, and the Global Open Access list. Moving on to the next slide here. You can download the full PDF from here. And it's an 11-page research report, so it's very similar to a published journal article in Nature. In Kind, I think, as better. We published the data here in an Excel spreadsheet, so I have mixed feelings about this particular kind of data sharing. But being in my area, if you do this and you don't publish the data, you're going to get critiqued. So this is really the Dataverse has more formal data with full documentation. Sometimes I will put a caution here. This is a working file because the idea, yeah, let's share our data and have it all documented. But I have a lot of data. If I had to document all that data so that other people could actually understand it, wow, that would be a lot of work. So this is a learning process, a learning curve for all of this. So I'm for open data, but a full open data to all of our data are not totally sure. So one of the things that I've added recently to the blog is a cite as, because I feel that people are reluctant to cite the blog post, and it's partly because they don't know how yet. So I provide an example. Here's how you can do this, and it's useful for us too, because often we're building on our own work. So when we do SpringerOpen 2020 to 2021, we can just grab this and say, here's our previous work for this. So what about peer review? Okay, you might be wondering, if just publishing on the blog, a lot of people think a blog is just, well, it's just your opinion, there's no peer review. So why do I do this? This is an example. So I published my work on Frontiers. It's another open access publisher in 2020. And I found that a third of their journals had increased their prices by 45 times the inflation rate. So these are huge price increases, and the third year in a row. I published this on June 3rd this year, and within a day, I had 5 comments on my blog post, including one by the actual publisher. And I received emails from people saying, I'm so glad you published this, because in Germany, they had national negotiations in process. So following the coalition-esque type of, let's transition the publishers and support them by APCs, they're having national negotiations as we were going along. So I took this into account and updated it in June 4th. So when people say, well, it's not peer reviewed, well, I don't know. I get peer reviewed here and critique that I wouldn't get in traditional journals. And if I did the traditional journal route, I'd be lucky if it was published a year from now. And meanwhile, that's not time for people who are doing the negotiations to deal with this. So it's a fast moving area like this. Those are some of the reasons why I have this open research approach rather than the traditional approach. So some of the results here. So the Plan S, the OA 2020, this is, we're trying to transition, bring the traditional publishers open over to open access. So this hybrid was a transitional model. It's been around for a couple of decades. And so the idea is you start funding some of the articles for open access, and eventually they'll move towards open access. But what we're beginning to see here is some of the open access journals have gone back the other way to hybrid for the traditional publishers. So not sure what to make of this. This is kind of early results. It'll be interesting to see what happens next year. But people who are trying to provide funding, and big funding, because these are countrywide deals, ought to know that it's not necessarily happening in the direction that they think. 40 of the journals have stopped publishing. The pricing model, there's a lot of titles we couldn't tell if they have a price or not. The pricing trends, it's you look at the average price, it's not much change, but by the journal, it's increasing, decreasing, remaining the same. And what we're seeing with the price increases, it's the journals that have lots of articles are the ones that increase. So if you're a payer, you need to know that, because if your researchers all want to publish in the most expensive journals, then a small increase in the average is not going to be a small increase in what you're paying. It's important because library groups in the EU and North America are negotiating what they call transformative agreements. So we're going to pay for our subscriptions plus the articles by our authors become open access. So as we're doing the research, those negotiations that our research is meant to inform are going on. Sometimes I wish that I kind of had picked a more archaic subject where no one was doing research in and be like you to keep up. But I've been working this way for a long time, so I'll keep it up. Okay, so my perspective, open versus traditional research, that the Scholar Journal is an archaic format, that it was optimized for print, that you needed to gather a certain amount of for the print medium and for the postal system. That's why you have 4 issues a year. That's how you have to do it. It doesn't make sense anymore and into the future. My most important work is all listed as other on my CV, and when I talk to other researchers, they have the same experience with that as well. If I had to focus on traditional formats to make my career brownie points, my research would be less valuable. Instead of giving people information about a publisher that they're negotiating with as negotiations are happening, with opportunity for the publisher to look at my data, comment on whether it's correct or not. If I had to wait a year to publish that, it would be less valuable for the purpose for which I do the research. My funder supports my work because of open research posts. One people think is, well, I need to do traditional publishing because the funders are not going to support this. I've had really, really good success with my funding. I put in 2 applications to the National Research Funders, and I got both cases. I got my funding. I asked for and received very close to the maximum that you can get. And I said, I'm going to do an open research process. I'm going to do an open research blog and open data. So it's not the case. So people have this idea of what the funders think, whereas the funders have been way ahead on wanting to push for change for a long time. At my university, the faculty collective agreement is, I would say, ahead of its time in recognizing diverse forms of research. So here at University of Ottawa, and some of our research funders as well, don't just recognize the peer-reviewed articles and book chapters and things like that, but there's many different types. So for example, if you're in theater, you might be doing research creation. Your research outputs can be a play. If you are in fine arts, your research creation might be an artwork. We have people who are creating new compositions and that sort of thing. So preprints, everything that I do, we don't need to update our collective agreement because it's already there. But for me, it does make it a little bit easier to be researching on open access because the people who evaluate my work have to know something about this stuff or they're not qualified to evaluate. So my recommendations to make the Global Knowledge Commons a reality, this would be, is DIY. Okay, okay, to develop local publishing capacity, so institutional repositories and local publishing, so you can provide local jobs at local wages and develop local leadership. This is important in India right now because the members of Coalition S that are pushing this from the EU, they're going to your government and the governments and trying to get them all on board. And that's my advice, push back. You don't want to have Indian research vetted by people in the EU and North America. You have a tradition of local journals in India and develop your own leadership. And look at to the future, not the past. So, just skip bringing the peer-reviewed journals into open access and focus on fully open research approaches and open data and experiment. And part of what's going on is we now have the electronic environment, the internet, and we don't know exactly what people might be doing with it. So other examples of types of research outputs that people are now, from a traditional view, seem like other. Some of my colleagues are working with things like they're working on AI solutions with a local hospital to develop apps to help the healthcare professionals do their work more efficiently, to help the patients be able to self-monitor conditions. So do we want people to be developing these kind of apps, or do we want people to be doing traditional peer-reviewed focus on traditional peer-reviewed articles, because that's what counts when you apply for tenure and promotion. You also do a lot of work in things like digital humanities, so people are creating a variety of different kinds of data sets, and this is having to do the traditional stuff rather than figuring out new ways is a distraction from doing what we can be doing. And avoid the most open forms of licensing, permitting downstream commercial reuse to avoid that development of underdevelopment effect. So that's my talk, and thank you very much for inviting me and for listening, and over to you for questions and comments.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. for your very highly informative talk on sustaining the knowledge commons and then giving your inputs regarding the collective sharing of all the knowledge of humankind free of charge for all to access and as openly accessible as possible. I'm extremely sorry for the interruption which had taken place in between. I'm extremely sorry for it. And now may I request Neha to please take up the questions.
Thank you, ma'am, for the opportunity. I will start with first question, and in the meantime, I would request others to please write them down in the chat session so that there is not too much of disturbance. Dr. Morrison, the first question that I have for you. Do you believe that the majority of publishers will fall in line with Plan S in 2021? This is from one of our teachers itself, Professor Rupak. So I thought I'll take up this first. Could you please tell us something?
Okay, thank you. That's very much, that's a really, really good question. Are publishers falling in line? I think the answer to that is both yes and no. So Springer Nature is one of the ones that has technically signed on, adopted Plan S, and yet, as I discussed in the slide, on what they're actually doing with SpringerOpen, while they're signing on to Plan S, they actually have journals that are flipping from fully open access over to hybrid. So kind of going in the opposite direction. And as I mentioned with Elsevier, I don't think it makes any sense for the business to flip the model. It's important to understand. We tend to look at them as librarians. We work with them as the coordinators of scholarly publishing, the people who have access to the quality stuff. But these are businesses, right? Springer Nature is wholly owned by the family-owned business Holtzbrinck Publishing, which is based in Germany. And in addition to owning Springer Nature and SpringerOpen, they also own Macmillan Education that does things like textbook sales and rentals. So when countries have things like copyright consultations, Springer, this is even before they were owned by Springer Nature, had a reputation, well deserved, for kind of playing both sides. They're lobbying on both sides of the fence. So they're lobbying for more open access because they see it as a benefit to them, but they also lobby for stronger copyright. So that's the second biggest publisher. The biggest publisher, Elsevier, is a publicly traded corporation. So their real mission has nothing to do with scholarly publishing. It's to return profits to the shareholders. So if there's less profit, why would they still remain in this business? Okay, so for them, it's not about can we just continue to have enough money to recover the cost. There's other for these traditional society publishers. There are other types of issues. So here in Canada, for example, we've got the journals that are supported by the funding agency, the Open Access Journals. Okay, and we have the big library groups, the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, the Ontario Council of University Libraries, that are spending a lot of money on this kind of stuff, $100 million a year. So most of this is going to Elsevier. And I keep telling them if you took a fraction of that and put it into Canadian publishing, you would save most of this money and make all of our work open access. So will the publishers fall in line? If they do, I think it's going to be short-lived because people think that those open licenses do things that they don't. They think this is used in most open license. It's going to be open access and remain open access in perpetuity. And unless someone's got it in an archive and has a mandate to do that. The license actually doesn't do that. I do not recommend DLIS.
Okay, thank you for your take on this. The second question is, open access comes with many issues, and one problem researchers are facing amid this pandemic is infodemic. Any suggestions to overcome infodemic?
That's a really, really good question, and I think that's that just keeps getting worse all the time because there's more and more information out there. I think one of the things, and this is more, it's a systemic level. So what can individual researchers do? There's not much that you can do right now, but I think we need to have more emphasis for researchers to spend more time reading and less time publishing. So one of the reasons there's just too much for people to take in is because of this pressure to publish in quantity, which doesn't make sense because if there's more and more research to read, you need more time to read and absorb it. And that pressure to publish, we're seeing this with COVID, that people are rushing to publish and then they're quickly having to retract things because they're not taking the time to really think things through to weigh the evidence. So yeah, more emphasis on reading, weighing the evidence, and less on publishing a lot in terms of quantity.
That's true. Anyone else, if they have any questions, can please write them in the chat box. In the meantime, lots of people have given it's a very informative session and they learned lots of things from here. You can see from the chat box itself if you want to. But otherwise, I just read out knowledgeable webinar, and this one, everyone has appreciated it too much. So I take the chance to now ask. There wasn't any question. Okay, I don't see any other questions right now. So I would request Dr. Shiv Kumar to take up the word of thanks. Thank you so much, Dr. Morrison. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to everybody, and thank you for your kind comments.
Okay, thank you, Neha. I'm audible?
Yes,
Yes,
Dr. Shiv, you are audible.
Okay. Now, it is a privilege for me to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. On behalf of Department of Library of Information Science, I extend my sincere gratitude to Dr. Heather Morrison for accepting our invitation to deliver a talk. Ma'am, your talk was very informative. Your wealth of topic that is sustaining knowledge commons is very important for academic community. You have highlighted all aspects beautifully in plain words. You have given live examples from publisher Elsevier and SpringerOpen. And this biomedical center was acquired by Springer. So they Springer want to contribute regarding scholarly communication, but they starting to spoil this open access, this publisher biomed. A number of journals are being seized. A number of journals has been transferred to other publishers. They are increasing article processing fees, and some are for some journals they are decreasing. So they want to improve the open access initiatives. They want to expose this. Ma'am, you are great supporter of and advocate of the open access movements for more than 20 years. You have raised these issues many times with the Open or other publisher from Germany, Frontiers. I have read your communication regarding Frontier, and you have created various academic blogs. One of them, that is Imaginary Journal of Poetic Economics, that was created around 2005. That time I was a regular reader of your blogs, but I have learned a lot regarding the various aspects of the open access that time. So I have learned a lot from your blogs. And now you are continuously writing on the issues of open access regularly. That topic is a dramatic growth of open access. So now today I am also hopeful that all participants have learned a lot from your talk, because this is the very relevant topic in this COVID lockdown. If people want to get information, want to share information, you have already given in your recommendation that all information regarding COVID treatment should be open. That should be open domain, so people can get benefit from that. Because the research is funded by the government, a public funded, that product should be the public good. You have work allowed. You have work more than 20 years. So now I thank to Punjab University authorities, especially Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Rajkumar for allowing us to organize this webinar series. I also thank all participants for being with us. My thanks also goes to faculty, research scholars, students of the department for their unending support. Thank you all again. We'll be meeting again in next national webinar on 26th at 11 a.m. Till then, stay safe and safe. Or we also invite Dr. Heather Morrison to, if possible, you can attend next webinar. Madam, when we are planning to invite someone from US and Canada. So first of all, your name came to my mind that we should invite you, or you willingly accepted our request. Thank you very much again, ma'am.
Thank you very much. It was an honor, and I'm glad to have learned a little bit about your program, and I'm impressed by your management of the video system. I have smaller classes and way more technical.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It was very nice meeting you, although virtually, Dr. Morrison, and we are really honored to have you here with us today. Thank you once again, and have a nice day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, all the participants. See you on 26th at 11 a.m. Thank you.